There are moments in history when reality fractures, when the veil between the visible and the invisible grows dangerously thin. It was a world driven by machines, by progress, by the relentless pulse of material science. Cities expanded, factories roared, and wires carried voices across continents. Humanity stood proud, a master of matter. But beneath the surface of this newfound power, something else stirred, a growing emptiness, a silent sickness of the soul. As the external world accelerated, the inner world began to collapse. And it is here, in this fragile intersection between the seen and the unseen, that a mysterious figure emerges, a woman shrouded in enigma, a traveler between worlds, a keeper of secrets whispered only in ancient temples and guarded in the shadows of forgotten mountains. Her name was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She was not a prophet, not a priestess, nor a sorceress in the way the world understands. She was something else, a bridge, a fracture line, a living doorway between two realities. For years, her life was a labyrinth of mysteries, vanishing into deserts, climbing the peaks of Tibet, sitting at the feet of hidden masters, decoding symbols buried for millennia beneath the sands of Egypt and the scrolls of forgotten civilizations. But every labyrinth has a center. Every journey has a moment when the traveler must step out of the shadows and into the blinding light of destiny. And now, that time had come. The whispers of secret chambers were no longer enough. The guarded wisdom of the East could no longer remain locked away. Humanity, though blind, was approaching a precipice. A call echoed from minds beyond matter, from intelligences not of this mundane plane. A mandate from the hidden custodians of Earth's spiritual evolution, the Mahatmas, the masters of wisdom, the keepers of the eternal flame. And the message was clear, unmistakable. It is time. Time to build a bridge between the mystical and the material, between the wisdom of the ancients and the hunger of the modern mind, between the East and the West. A bridge called the Theosophical Society. What you are about to witness is not merely the founding of an organization. It is the moment when a secret mission becomes a public revolution, when the silent currents of the occult crash into the roaring tides of history. This is the story of how Helena Blavatsky transformed a hidden tradition into a global movement, how she turned whispers into words, shadows into symbols, silence into sound. The year was 1875, an era baptized in steel, electricity, and the restless heartbeat of progress. Cities grew like living machines. Iron veins of railways pulsed across continents, and invisible voices traveled through wires that stretched farther than empires ever dared to reach. Science was the new religion. Laboratories replaced temples. Telescopes became the new eyes of humanity. Microscopes, the new gateways to the invisible. The atom was dissected, the stars charted, the earth mapped and measured. The age of certainty had arrived, or so it seemed. But beneath the thunder of factories, beneath the ink-stained hands of newspaper presses, and the sharp scent of burning coal, a different kind of hunger spread, silent, suffocating. It was the hunger of the soul. The churches spoke, but their words grew hollow. Dogmas echoed, but fewer listened. The old gods were fading, exiled by equations and experiments. The invisible was now dismissed as superstition. Mysticism became madness. Spirit became an outdated myth. And yet something didn't fit. Something resisted. For all its instruments, for all its numbers, science could not answer the most ancient questions. What is consciousness? What is the purpose of existence? Why does suffering exist? Where does the soul go when the body dies? The microscope could not find the soul. The telescope could not locate heaven. And as humanity rushed forward, faster, louder, prouder, many began to feel that something essential was being left behind. In the east, the sacred flame still burned, hidden in mountain monasteries, preserved in ancient manuscripts, guarded by men and women whose very existence was denied by the Western world. The wisdom of the Vedas, the echoes of the Upanishads, the whispers of Tibetan lamas, and the guarded teachings of esoteric brotherhoods that had watched and waited for centuries. And meek in the shadow between these two worlds, the industrial and the mystical, the visible and the hidden, stood a single figure, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She had walked paths that the West called impossible. She had entered temples that officially did not exist. She had sat at the feet of teachers whom scholars dismissed as legends. And what she had learned was not merely information. It was a revelation, a vision of reality that shattered the boundaries of matter and mind. But by 1875, it was clear. The time for secrecy was ending. Look around, she thought. Look at this world of progress and paradox, a civilization that could harness lightning, yet could not answer the cry of its own heart, a society that could cross oceans in days, yet stood utterly lost when asked, "Why are we here?" The gap was growing, not between nation, but between the outer and the inner, the material and the spiritual, the mind and the soul. And as Blavatsky walked the streets of New York, a city roaring with ambition, drowning in noise, pulsing with invention, she realized that the mission whispered to her in the Himalayas was no longer just a whisper. It was a mandate, a necessity, a demand from something far greater than herself. The West needed a bridge to the forgotten sciences of the soul, a bridge to the wisdom of the ancients, a bridge between the mechanical and the mystical, between the logic of the modern world and the truth that transcends logic itself. But how? How do you speak of the invisible to a world obsessed with the visible? How do you talk of spirit in a marketplace of matter? How do you teach that the universe is not merely a machine, but a living consciousness, when even the very idea of the soul was now ridiculed? The task seemed impossible. And yet, Blavatsky knew, as surely as the sun rises, that the impossible was precisely her territory. For years, the Mahatmas, the hidden adepts, the guardians of humanity's spiritual evolution, had prepared her for this. They had trained her, tested her, broken her, and rebuilt her, not for her own sake, but for this very moment in history. She carried no sacred staff, wore no ceremonial robes. Her weapon was knowledge, her shield was the truth. Her mission was to remind a sleeping world that the universe is not dead matter, that consciousness is the foundation of all reality, that life is sacred. And so, in this year of steam and steel, of wires and wonders, in this 1875 that worshipped the machine, Blavatsky prepared to ignite a spiritual fire, a fire that would spread far beyond New York, beyond America, beyond her own lifetime, a fire that would become the Theosophical Society. A revolution was about to begin. The message had arrived, not carried by couriers nor penned by human hands alone, but through a means that defied the rules of ordinary existence. Letters materialized from nowhere, ink that shimmered like liquid gold, words that seemed to echo from realms beyond the reach of flesh and bone. They were not from ordinary men, but from beings who, according to Blavatsky, had transcended the boundaries of time, space, and matter. The Mahatmas, guardians of ancient knowledge, custodians of a wisdom older than civilization itself, watchers of humanity's fragile evolution, silent yet ever present, hidden yet holding the keys to mysteries the world had long forgotten or had chosen to ignore. For centuries, perhaps millennia, they had waited, watched, guided when the time was right, intervened when the balance of the world teetered on the edge of chaos, and now the message was clear. The time has come. The voice was not heard by ears, but by something deeper, a resonance felt in the marrow of the soul. The world needs a bridge between East and West, between the seen and the unseen, between the material and the spiritual. And to the one called Helena, they spoke with unwavering certainty. You are that bridge. But how does one become a bridge between worlds? How does a single woman, and in a society that dismissed the very idea of the soul, stand before the tides of ignorance, of ridicule, of blind materialism, and declare that reality itself is far greater than the eye can see? Blavatsky had spent years in preparation. This was not a sudden calling, it was the culmination of lifetimes of work. Her journeys to Egypt, to India, to Tibet were not mere wanderings, they were initiations, trials. Each desert crossed, each monastery entered, each cryptic teaching absorbed, was part of a design that stretched beyond her own understanding. Or perhaps she understood perfectly. And now, as the gas lamps flickered against the dark streets of New York, as the factories roared and newspapers thundered with the latest triumphs of science, a different kind of current flowed silently through the ether. Letters appearing from thin air, words and written in languages few could read, instructions as precise as they were mysterious. Gather the seekers, find those whose minds are open, whose hearts still whisper of something more, something beyond the machinery of the world. Plant the seed of a revolution not of blood, but of consciousness. But this was no easy task, for even as the Mahatmas offered their guidance, the obstacles were formidable. Skepticism, hostility, mockery. The very air was thick with doubt. To speak of invisible worlds was to invite scorn. To claim the existence of higher beings was to be labeled a fraud, a lunatic, or worse. And yet Blavatsky did not flinch, for within her burned the fire of a different certainty, one not born from belief, but from direct experience, from standing in the presence of that which the world denied. She had seen the veil lift. She had heard the voice of the silence. She had walked where few dared to dream. And she knew that the task was not hers alone. Somewhere in the currents of destiny, others were being drawn to the same magnet, the same call. Henry Steele Olcott, a lawyer, a journalist, a mind as sharp as any blade forged by reason, yet haunted by the same question: is there more? William Quan Judge, a young Irish lawyer, carrying within him a restless hunger, a knowing that the answers offered by the world were fragments of a far greater truth. And others, unknown to history, seekers, wanderers, misfits, whose hearts still pulsed to the rhythm of the ancient mystery, even if they could not yet name it. Fate began weaving its threads. Conversations once accidental became meetings of destiny. Random encounters became turning points written in the hidden annals of the Akashic records. And amidst the clamor of the city, the outlines of something unprecedented began to take shape. A society, not of believers, but of investigators, not of dogma, but of discovery. A society whose very foundation was a rebellion, not against science, nor against religion, but against ignorance. A rebellion that declared, there is no religion higher than truth. And the Mahatmas watched, guided, whispered from beyond the veil. But always the choice was human. Always the labor was human. Always the sacrifice was human. And as the ink dried on letters that had no sender, as hands trembled over parchment that seemed to pulse with energy not of this world, Blavatsky knew the threshold had been crossed. The shadows had opened. The stage was set. And soon, The first words would be spoken, and of a society that would forever change the spiritual destiny of the West. It begins. It was the night of September 7th, 1875. The city outside pulsed with the rhythm of modernity, gas lamps flickering, carriages echoing over cobblestone streets, the distant hum of industry merging with the breath of an empire in motion. But within a modest apartment on Irving Place, something else stirred, something different, something timeless. Gathered there was a circle of minds unlike any other. Lawyers, scientists, writers, skeptics, mystics, restless souls, all drawn by a force they could not fully name, but could no longer ignore. And at the center sat a woman whose very existence defied the limits of explanation. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Her eyes carried the reflection of deserts crossed, monasteries traversed, and secrets learned beyond the veil of common life. Her presence was magnetic. Her words, sharp as lightning, yet filled with something ancient, something eternal. Beside her, Henry Steele Olcott, the pragmatic mind, the investigator, a man forged in the fires of logic and law, now standing at the threshold of a reality that shattered every boundary he had once trusted. And nearby, William Quan Judge, young but with eyes that spoke of an old soul, a seeker disguised as a lawyer, a bridge between worlds yet to be built. The air was heavy, charged, not with doubt, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. What began as casual discussions about the mysteries of life, the unseen forces that shape existence, had over the course of weeks transformed into something far more precise and far more dangerous. There was a question now, hovering in the room like an invisible fire. What if we formalize this? What if we create not just a conversation, but a movement? And the answer came not with hesitation, but with the quiet certainty of destiny unfolding. Blavatsky spoke first, her voice calm, yet thunderous in its implications. The time for secrecy is over. The masters have guided us to this moment. The world is ready, or it must be made ready. Olcott, ever the pragmatic, framed the vision in language the modern world could accept. A society dedicated to the study of the hidden laws of nature, to uncover the latent powers within the human being, and to establish a universal brotherhood beyond race, creed, or color. 3 principles, 3 pillars, simple in words, yet revolutionary in their depth. First, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. A radical idea in a world still drowning in prejudice, colonialism, and division. It was a direct challenge to the very foundations of 19th century society. Second, to encourage the comparative study of religion, philosophy, and science, to break down the walls that had isolated these fields into rival camps, to reveal that truth is not the property of any one faith, nor the prisoner of science, but a flame that burns at the intersection of all. And third, to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. A call to reawaken the forgotten sciences of the soul, to explore clairvoyance, telepathy, the mysteries of consciousness itself, not as superstition, but as legitimate frontiers of human evolution. The decision was unanimous. Papers were drawn, ink flowed, names were signed, not merely onto a document, but into the ledger of history itself. The Theosophical Society was born. But this was no religion. It was no sect. It was a laboratory for the soul, a training ground for the mind, the spirit, and the inner capacities humanity had long ignored or forgotten. a declaration that the borders between East and West were illusions, that the rift between science and spirituality was an error of perception, not a law of nature. And as those present sealed the document, a quiet tension rippled through the unseen. For somewhere, in the hidden chambers of the world, the Mahatmas watched, not as deities, not as masters in the earthly sense, but as elder brothers of the human race, guides, witnesses, custodians of a lineage stretching beyond the memory of modern civilization. Yet, even as the ink dried, the challenges began. The ridicule of the press, the scorn of religious leaders, the dismissal of scientists, and from the shadows, forces less visible, but far more dangerous, stirred in discomfort. For the birth of this society was not merely an intellectual event. It was a crack in the walls that had kept humanity asleep, a tremor in the collective mind that signaled the return of something the world had long tried to bury, a remembrance that the universe is alive, that consciousness was not a byproduct of matter, but the very foundation of existence, that within the heart of every human lies a spark of the infinite, waiting to be remembered. And so, on that quiet September night in a modest apartment in New York, a revolution began. Not of flags, not of weapons, not of politics, but of spirit, of awareness, of awakening. The night that changed everything. And the world would never be the same. There are moments in history when something invisible becomes undeniable, when the whisper of an idea becomes the roar of a movement. And so it was that from the quiet spark ignited in that small New York apartment, a structure began to rise. Not of stone, not of wood, but of consciousness. A temple with no walls, an architecture of the invisible. At its foundation stood 3 pillars, 3 columns upon which the entire mission of the Theosophical Society was built. The first pillar, universal brotherhood, a declaration simple in words, but revolutionary in its implications, a call that transcended race, creed, gender, caste, and color. In a world fractured by colonialism, segregation, religious dogma, and scientific arrogance, it was an act of defiance, a bold rejection of the boundaries humanity had wrapped around itself for centuries. It was the remembrance of a truth the ancient mystics had whispered across ages, that all souls come from the same source, that beneath the illusions of skin, language, and faith, we are one consciousness, wearing different masks. The brotherhood was not an ideal. It was a law of nature, waiting to be realized. But how could such unity be achieved in a world drowning in division? The answer led to the second pillar, the comparative study of religion, philosophy, and science. Not the blind acceptance of dogma, nor the arrogant dismissal of mystery, but the synthesis of wisdom. To place side by side the Vedas and the Gospels, the Kabbalah and quantum theory, the Tao and the microscope, to strip away the rituals of separation and uncover the golden threads that connect them all. In this was the quiet revolution. For if humanity could understand that every religion is a chapter, every philosophy a paragraph, and every scientific discovery a footnote in the same cosmic manuscript, then the walls would fall. The wars of belief, the arrogance of certainty, the ignorance of difference, here would crumble. But this, Mike, was not merely an intellectual pursuit. It was experiential, living, breathing. For beyond the books, beyond the rituals, beyond the theories, waited the third pillar, the investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. A statement, both terrifying and liberating. that reality is far vaster than the five senses suggest, that the human being is not merely flesh and bone, but a layered being, physical, emotional, mental, and something more. A field of consciousness woven into the fabric of the cosmos itself, and within this field lie forces, potentials, capabilities, clairvoyance, telepathy, healing, the ability to perceive beyond time, beyond space, beyond form. Not magic, not fantasy, but laws of nature, waiting to be rediscovered. The ancients knew this. The rishis of India, the hierophants of Egypt, the shamans of forgotten tribes, the alchemists who turned not lead into gold, but ignorance into illumination. And yet, modernity had cast these truths into shadow, labeling them superstition, dismissing them as relics of a primitive mind. But the Theosophical Society stood as a bridge, a declaration that the ancient and the modern, the scientific and the spiritual, were not enemies. They were halves of the same truth, waiting to be rejoined. And this was more than a manifesto. It was a mirror held to the face of humanity, a reminder that the suffering of the world is not the result of fate nor punishment, but of ignorance. Ignorance of who we are, ignorance of the laws that govern both matter and spirit. And the mission was clear: to dissolve that ignorance meant to awaken, not just as individuals, but as a species, standing on the threshold of a new age. A revolution, not of nations, but of perception. A war, not against others, but against the shadows within ourselves. The shadows of separation, of fear, of forgetting. The US was the architecture of the spiritual revolution. A temple without walls. A sanctuary for the seekers, the questioners, the souls who refused to accept that life was merely birth, struggle, and death. A place where science bows to wonder and faith bows to knowledge, where the East and the West finally remember that they are one. But a question lingered, even as these pillars rose into the invisible. Would the world listen, or would it resist? For the forces that benefit from ignorance do not surrender easily. And as the society began to grow, so too did the storm. A storm of doubt, of ridicule, of opposition, both seen and unseen. The battle had only just begun. From that night forward, nothing would ever be the same. An idea, once whispered in secret, was now echoing through the corridors of the visible world. The mission had a body now, a form, a pulse, no longer confined to letters, visions, or private conversations with the unseen. It was rising into the tangible. The first step was movement. Movement across borders, across oceans, across the invisible lines that nations and minds had drawn for centuries. Maps unfolded, routes were drawn, connections ignited like veins of light across the skin of the earth. From the crowded streets of New York, to the sacred mountains of India, to the salons of Europe, the current began to flow. Theosophy was no longer an idea waiting to be born. It had become a living force. But as the light expanded, so did the shadows. For with every step forward, the guardians of the old world stirred. Skeptics, critics, the defenders of rigid science, of orthodox religion, of the status quo. What was this strange society that dared to suggest that matter was not the ultimate reality, that dared to whisper that the soul was more real than flesh? Who were these people who spoke of masters, of invisible laws, of hidden potentials locked within every human being? The newspapers, the academies, the religious institution watched with suspicion and then with hostility. Accusations were inevitable. charlatans, frauds, dreamers lost in fantasy. And yet, beneath the noise, something undeniable was taking shape. Centers began to emerge, not temples of worship, but sanctuaries of learning, of questioning, of remembering. In these early halls, sacred texts from every corner of the world were gathered, translated, compared, studied side by side, as if weaving together a tapestry of humanity's forgotten wisdom. The Vedas whispered to the Kabbalah, the Tao flowed into the mysteries of Egypt, the Upanishads met the echoes of the Hermetic fragments, and in every crossroad of thought a single truth emerged, that beneath the thousands of names, there was only one source. But it wasn't just about studying the past, it was about igniting the future. The society became a crucible, a place where science was invited to expand, where religion was challenged to transcend dogma, and where philosophy was dared to touch the mystical. Members came from all walks of life: lawyers, scientists, artists, mystics, politicians, wanderers. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by a deep, haunting feeling that the material world was not enough, that life must be more than birth, survival, and death. They were the first wave, the vanguard of a revolution, not of blood, but of consciousness. But the work was far from easy. Every lecture, every publication, every public statement was met with resistance, not just from the outside, but from within. For the path of awakening is littered with tests. Egos clashed, doubts arose, misunderstandings fractured fragile alliances, and always, behind the veil, the silent watchers observed. The Mahatmas, the teachers, the custodians of the ancient wisdom, watching to see if the seeds would take root. And yet, despite it all, the momentum grew. Books were written, letters were exchanged across continents, lectures filled crowded halls. Some came to mock, some stayed to listen. Theosophy began to plant itself into the collective psyche as a quiet question, a subtle disturbance in the sleep of materialism. What if reality is not what it seems? What if consciousness precedes matter? What if humanity has forgotten its true origin and its true potential? And as these questions echoed, so too did the mission evolve. Helena knew the path ahead would not be one of comfort. She was not a priest, nor a guru, nor a saint. She was a bridge, a rebel, a messenger standing between two worlds, often accepted by neither. Her health fragile, her finances uncertain, her reputation under constant assault. But the flame remained. Alongside her, Colonel Henry Olcott, a man of logic, a man of discipline, yet a man transformed by the mysteries he could no longer deny. Together, they crossed oceans. In 1878, their eyes turned eastward. India, the land of sacred memory, of broken chains and forgotten truths. It was there, they believed, that the next phase must unfold. For the West, he had grown deaf to the whisper of spirit. But in the East, the embers of the ageless wisdom still glowed, waiting to be rekindled. And so, with little more than determination and the silent guidance of their unseen mentors, they embarked. A journey, not just across seas, but across epochs of human forgetting. A pilgrimage and from the broken scaffolds of materialism toward the temple of the soul. From that point onward, the mission would no longer be theory. It would become action, embodied, visible. Schools would be built, lodges would open, thousands would come, seeking, questioning, remembering. And yet, for Helena, the road was only beginning. For the forces of resistance were awakening too, and the greatest storms still waited beyond the horizon. In the autumn of 1875, A bridge was built, a bridge between worlds, visible and invisible, material and spiritual, outer knowledge and inner truth. Some walked past it without ever seeing. Others, even today, can feel its presence like a vibration in the marrow of their bones. For the Theosophical Society was never merely an institution. It was and remains an idea encoded into the very fabric of human consciousness. A compass hidden in plain sight. A subtle frequency that calls out to those who are ready. It was never about dogma, never about belief. It was and is about remembering. Remembering that humanity is one family, that life is sacred, that consciousness precedes form, that the universe is not dead matter but living intelligence woven with purpose and mystery. And perhaps those who are listening now have felt it too. A whisper in moments of silence, a pull towards questions others fear to ask. Who am I to really? Why am I here, in this body, in this time, on this fragile blue sphere, adrift among the stars? Am I just flesh and thought, destined to vanish? Or is there something deeper, older, more enduring, waiting quietly beneath the noise of the world? The bridge still stands. For some, it remains invisible, a myth, a phantom of forgotten seekers. For others, it appears like the faint outline of constellations, only visible when the mind grows still. Theosophy was never about escaping the world. It was and is about transforming the way we see the world. It invites us to peel back the veils, to recognize the hidden architecture behind existence, to understand that evolution is not merely biological, but spiritual, that the journey of the soul stretches beyond one lifetime, beyond one culture, beyond one planet even, and that beneath every difference of skin, language and religion or belief, there is only one fire burning, one life expressing itself through infinite forms. And what if you were never just a bystander in this mystery? What if your presence here, now, is part of it? What if the very act of listening, of wondering, is a sign that the current has already touched you? This is not just history. It is a mirror reflecting a choice ancient as time, yet forever new. To remain asleep, adrift in the illusion of separateness, chasing shadows, or to awaken, to step beyond the visible and remember that behind the chaos of the outer world, there is order. Behind the noise, there is silence. Behind the illusion of randomness, there is meaning. The echo of that night in 1875 has not faded. It vibrates through time, through space, through the very fabric of human consciousness. It lives in the hands that turn sacred pages, in the eyes that search the stars, in the minds that dare to ask what lies beyond the veil. And perhaps, just perhaps, those who hear it were always meant to hear it. Not by accident, not by chance, but because the path has always been there, waiting. A bridge between what is and what could be. And so the question lingers, like a fragrance that cannot be named. If the invisible leaves footprints, are you ready to follow them? Because the bridge is not made of wood, nor stone, nor metal. It is made of attention, of awareness, of the courage to see what most refuse to see. And once seen, it can never be unseen. Once crossed, the world is never the same. The invisible always leaves traces, and for those who know where to look. If this echo resonated within you, don't ignore it. The path doesn't end here. This is only the first portal. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and join us on this journey between the visible and the invisible. Because in the next chapters, we will follow the forgotten trails, unveil the secrets of hidden journeys, the letters from the masters, the phenomena, and the revelations that shape not only the life of Helena Blavatsky, but the very foundations of modern esotericism. And remember, the invisible always leaves traces, for those who know where to look.